Thank you. Good morning. I hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving. Teresa and I went down to Little Rock, Arkansas, where her parents live. We've been going down there for 25, 26 years for Thanksgiving to see family. It was a great celebration. And it's always great because after that celebration is always the first Sunday of Advent. Are you ready for the Christmas season? I hope so. We spent all day yesterday. Teresa spent all day yesterday decorating our home, and she did a beautiful job. She makes our house such a wonderful home. But this Advent, we are celebrating the good news of the coming of Christ into our world in new ways. And Advent is that season where we prepare our hearts, open our minds and spirits to welcome Christ into our lives and our world in a fresh and new way during this Christmas. And what we're going to do this Advent is we're going to pull back the curtain of our imaginations. And we're going to look at the original Christmas cast. And we're going to tell the greatest story that's ever been told that is still being told. Now, did you catch that turn of a phrase when I said the greatest story ever told that's still being told? Because Christmas is not something that just happens in the past. Christ is still coming into our world. Our world needs Christ now as much as ever. And it's a story being still told, which means that Christ is still inviting people to get up on the stage of history to participate. And maybe today, you're going to hear a calling to join that Christmas cast. Now, in this series, as we look at 4 characters in this Christmas story, we're going to stay in Luke. Luke's gospel has 2 chapters where most of our Christmas story comes from, the traditional Christmas narrative. And we're going to look at it with a new and fresh approach. And so today we're going to look here now at Luke chapter 1, verse 5. In the time of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah. His wife Elizabeth was also a descendant of Aaron. Both of them were righteous in the sight of God, observing all the Lord's commands and decrees blamelessly. But they were childless because Elizabeth was not able to conceive, and they were both very old. Once when Zechariah's division was on duty and when he was serving as a priest before God, he was chosen by Lot, according to the custom of the priesthood, to go into the temple of the Lord and to burn incense. And when the time for the burning of incense came, all the assembled worshipers were praying outside. Then an angel of the Lord appeared to him standing at the right side of the altar of incense. When Zechariah saw him, he was startled and gripped with fear. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been heard. Your wife will bear you a son, and you will call him John. He'll be a joy and a delight to you, and many will rejoice because of his birth." Zechariah asked the angel, "How can I be sure of this? I'm an old man, and my wife is well along in years." The angel said to him, "I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and I've been sent to speak to you and tell you this good news. And now you will be silent and not able to speak until the day this happens, because you did not believe my words, which will come true at their appointed time." Will you pray with me? God, as we begin this series of messages in the Gospel of Luke and we pull back the curtain on the Christmas cast, speak to our hearts and minds the good news of the Christmas story. Give us fresh visions of who you're calling us to be and how you're calling us to serve and to live this story in this time, in this world. Everybody did say? So if you were going to tell the greatest story ever told, where would you begin? Well, Luke's gospel, the writer of the gospel, pulls back the curtain, and Herod the Great walks onto the stage. In the days of Herod the Great. Now, when he walked on the stage, people were afraid. Because this is not just biblical filler material that Luke needed to get 1,000 words for his essay. This name and this character, Herod, represented fear and darkness and difficulty. The days of Herod were difficult and dark days. Herod was a puppet king for the oppressor Rome who had been oppressing the people for years. King Herod, however, was a great builder. He built all kinds of magnificent structures all over Judea. In the southern part of Judea, he built Masada, which is a fortress on top of a high mountain bluff that overlooks the Dead Sea. He built Caesarea by the sea, which was a great modern city that had an actual place of worship to the god Roma, the pagan god of the Romans. He rebuilt forts and palaces for himself, but he also rebuilt Jerusalem and expanded the temple and rebuilt a temple that the people enjoyed at the time. But in spite of all these notable achievements, he was a paranoid, ruthless sociopath who eliminated and killed anyone who stood in his way or who might be a rival, including several members of his own family. Now, when the curtain comes open and we see Herod the Great standing on the center of the stage, what you need to know is it had been 400 years since God had spoken. Go back and look in the Old Testament, what we should call the Hebrew Scriptures. The very last book in the Old Testament in the Hebrew Scriptures is the prophet Malachi. Malachi spoke a prophetic word over the people of God. And when he put down his pen, it was the last time God spoke. 400 years go by, no prophets, no visions, no angels, silence. Now think about that for a minute. Think about the last 400 years of our history. Everything that's transpired in the last 400 years. No word from God, nothing. And here now, the curtain comes back and God is ready to speak. And then Zechariah and Elizabeth walk onto the stage. An old man and an old woman. Look at them closely and you'll see gray hair and wrinkles on their faces. You see them limping along because they have bad knees. They're kind of bent over from a lifetime of hard work. And you look at their face and you see kindness and joy in their face, but behind the kindness and joy on their face is a lifetime of disappointment and one unanswered prayer. How unusual. Why would God have Zechariah walk onto the stage at the beginning of the most momentous time? Why not pick someone else like Tom Cruise or Taylor Swift? But it's an old man and an old woman. Zechariah was a priest. His wife came from a family of priesthood, family of priests too. Luke says that they were righteous and blameless before the Lord. It doesn't mean that they were perfect people. It just means that they were observant and faithful Jewish people who did their very best to observe the Jewish law and customs. You know, every church I've ever served has had a Zechariah and Elizabeth. It's what keeps the church going. They're that older couple that are always there to pass out the bulletins and to open up the doors and to make the coffee and to cut the donuts into little pieces. You know, they're the older couple who knows where all the ornaments are stored every year. They're the ones who made most of the ornaments on the tree. And they're the couple who on the day after Christmas Eve will show up when no one notices to clean the wax off the seats, drip from the candles on Christmas Eve. I mean, because no matter how often the minister says, hey, hold your candle just right, you don't want to drip the wax, there's always a bunch of kids who drip wax all over the sanctuary, and Zechariah and Elizabeth show up every year without anybody asking them to do it. They come and spend hours cleaning up the wax, and no one notices. They're the couple who says, people have come and gone over the last 30 or 40 years in our church, but even if we're the last one here, we're never going to leave. We'll be the last ones to stay to the very end of the church until we're the last person to lock the doors and turn out the lights. That's who they were, Zechariah and Elizabeth. They were good people. But they carried this one burden. They were childless. In that day and age, not like today, we understand the medical reasons for infertility, but in that day, it was considered a disgrace. And there were whispers about them. There must be some sort of sin or some darkness in their past. God must be punishing them and closing their womb for some reason. And they carried that disappointment around them with them their entire life. Now, Luke tells us that it was his time to go to Jerusalem to serve in the temple. Belonging to the priesthood meant that twice a year he would go to Jerusalem to serve a week at a time with an order of priests to service the temple. There'd be prayers twice a day, prayers in the morning, prayers in the afternoon, and someone would always be selected to represent everyone to go into the altar of incense in the sanctuary to burn the incense as the prayers for the people. Because there were more than 18 to 20,000 priests at the time, the chance that you would be selected was pretty rare indeed, and it was remote. So to be selected was kind of like winning the lottery. And of all things, this man who had lived with a lifetime of disappointment, who was righteous and faithful, the lot fell on him that day, and he was chosen to go into the sanctuary, to light the candle, to burn the incense. So he purified himself, he cleansed himself, got himself ready. They put him in the clean robes and the nice robes, and he walked up to the burnt offering, where they made the burnt offering outside the temple, took some embers from the fire, walked into the sanctuary for the first time, for the greatest moment of his life, and then was to light the candles and offer prayers for the people. Now, what was he praying at that time? He was praying what all Jews prayed at that time. God, it's been 400 years since you've sent a prophet. You told us that you were going to send the Messiah. And now we've had 400 years of oppression, one tyrant after another, one kingdom taking us over after another, oppression, brutality, hardship, and poverty and suffering. God, will you please deliver us? Deliver us from the Romans. Send to us a Messiah. He would pray these prayers and would light the incense, and the incense would go up and the aroma would go up to God, representing the prayers of the people. Now outside, thousands would gather for the prayers. And the moment they saw the smoke arising from the temple, they would fall to their knees themselves and pray to God, deliver us and save us. But something happened. Zechariah didn't emerge from the temple because the thing that he never imagining happening actually happened. God sent a messenger, broke the silence of 400 years, and to this old, broken down old man, God sent an angel. And he was scared out of his mind. I mean, you would be too. I mean, when we pray, we don't expect God to show up because we're not Pentecostals. I mean, when we pray, we expect to get warm feelings inside and inspiration. But if an angel showed up, we'd be scared half the day. We say, God, I'm not a Pentecostal. I'm not one of those holy roller types that worship in a white clapboard church. We don't handle snakes here. This is not my church. We're polite people. We'd be scared too. He's scared out of his mind. And then the angel says, I've heard your prayer. God heard your prayer. And by the way, it's interesting. Do you know what Zechariah's name means in Hebrew? It means the Lord has remembered. God has remembered his people. God has broken the silence. And poor Zechariah is probably thinking, me? Me? Yes, you. And not only you, Zechariah, but your wife. Of all these years, I've I've answered your prayers, and you're going to have a baby. How can this be? I'm not even sure I want a baby. We're old. Oh my. And he says, I am Gabriel. That's the Gabriel that last spoke to Daniel 600 years ago. I am Gabriel, and I stand in the presence of God, and I brought you this good news. And because you've not welcomed and received the good news, you're not going to speak until the baby is born. Now, you love the story when you unpack it and the drama, because there's so much humor in it. Imagine this. They're waiting for Zechariah. It's the highest moment of his life. They're waiting for Zechariah to come out, and it never comes out. They see the smoke go up, and when he walks out, he's white as a ghost. He's shaking. He's supposed to give a blessing over the people so they can get up off their knees, and he can't even talk. Think how funny that is. God has not spoken for 400 years, and the prophet he has chosen is speechless. Not even allowed to talk. And can you imagine what the conversation was like when we got home? Or the non-conversation? It must have sounded wacky. Yeah, an angel showed up and said that we're going to have a baby. Well, how are we going to have a baby? Well, it's the same way people always have a baby. You know, it's not going to be an immaculate conception. You're going to have to be involved in this whole thing, Elizabeth. Can you imagine him even? She must have thought he was crazy. She's not going to let him get close enough for it to happen, but something must have happened. It's just all crazy. And she does have the baby. And they do give birth to John. And the whole Christmas story begins with God's choice of these very unusual people. Now, I have a few observations and one very disturbing reality about this story. The first is that God, when God is telling a story and casting parts for a story, God always chooses unusual characters for the story. God didn't choose Herod the king. He didn't choose the high priest. He didn't choose Caesar Augustus. He chose an older man and woman who couldn't have children. You know, the pandemic has been really hard on churches all over the United States. And right now, a lot of churches are looking for pastors because churches have also experienced the great resignation. Because of conflict, difficulty in churches, hardship, all the things that have happened in the last 2 years, pastors are resigning in record numbers, and churches are looking for pastors all over the country. And I want to tell you one thing I know about every church looking for a minister right now in the United States, no matter what church it is. They fill out a congregational profile, and they're all looking for the same person. They also all want a pastor who's 35 years old, is married, and has 3 kids, and has 40 years of experience. On not a single congregational profile anywhere in the country does it say, we're looking for someone who is now getting the senior discount, who has gray hair, wrinkles, and is on Medicare. Nowhere. Nobody's looking for that person. But that's how God works. God always picks the people that no one expects. And this is just the beginning. He picks fishermen and tax collectors to tell his story. The first missionary in the Gospel of Mark is a man who lived in a cemetery and he ran around naked, screaming at the top of his lungs. Jesus picks him to be the first missionary to the Gentiles. There is not a Tom Cruise in the whole story, as I mentioned earlier. Taylor Swift isn't in the story either way. And besides that, Jesus can't even get a ticket to one of her concerts. And you know, you look around at the people sitting in this room and you think, well, surely God wouldn't choose him. You see, the reality is, there's a bunch, this is a burden I have on my heart. There are churches all over Oklahoma looking for pastors. and thinking our day is done. It's over for us. The only place it's happening is there's a mega church with a charismatic young preacher with expensive shoes. That's not how God works. All those small churches all over Oklahoma with a bunch of Zechariahs and Elizabeth, don't you know that God may just show up there this Christmas? Everything, according to the Lord, doesn't happen in a mega way. The second thing in the story is it's about bitterness. I mean, we all have prayers that go unanswered, right? We all have disappointments. I know that every person in this room, you have some sort of disappointment in your life. You prayed about something and it didn't happen, and you live with it your whole life. It could be any number of things. And what happens to that disappointment is often becomes bitterness. We give up on God, and we just sit on the sidelines instead of getting involved. But what I admire so much about Elizabeth and Zechariah, what made them righteous and blameless before the Lord, is they didn't let their disappointment discourage them or defeat them or define them. They just kept doing the next right thing. And if we're not careful, that disappointment will make our hearts grow hard. And so this Christmas season is the opportunity for us to be like this couple, to open our hearts again to God. Now, this is the part of the story that I think is really disturbing, though. Zechariah and Elizabeth had been praying for years for a baby. And when it came time for God to give them one, do you think they really wanted one? We just went down to Little Rock. We've been doing it, as I mentioned earlier, for 25 or more years to our in-laws' house. And now all the kids have had kids who've had kids. And so now the house on Thanksgiving is filled with people with lots of little great-grandkids running around. My mother-in-law and father-in-law have been in their house alone for weeks on end. No one in their home. And then suddenly everybody swarms on their kitchen like a horde of locusts to consume everything inside. And these little great-grandkids run around and make noise and break things. And this year was Miles' first family Thanksgiving. Miles is a great-grandkid. He's 1 year old, and he's just started walking, and he doesn't do anything but move, walk, scream, and break things. So we've been hoarding him all day, and it's traditional to Arkansas. All our ladies and wives and spouses are in the kitchen doing things and making Christmas ornaments. All the men are about to sit down to watch the Cowboy football game play the Giants. My father-in-law, who's been napping in the easy chair, gets up to go get a piece of pumpkin pie, and Miles grabs the remote control. And Miles, somehow or another, in an instant, turned the cable connection off. And it was sheer panic. The Cowboys are on, and it wasn't so much that we wanted to watch football. We just didn't want to make ornaments or clean the kitchen. The men in the room were thrown into a complete panic, and it took us 30 to 45 minutes to finally get the game on. I looked at my father-in-law. He was just sweating with fear and anxiety. And I walked over to him and I said, "Hey, Curtis, you know the story on Sunday is about a couple about your age who have a baby. How would you and Nancy like to have a baby at this point?" "Oh, it sounds terrible." "No. No way. It sounds more like a punishment than a blessing." I mean, think about it. They were settled in their life and they were comfortable with where their life was, and all of a sudden God comes along, and instead of letting them just rest and watch other people do the work, they were called to be a part of the greatest story ever told. The reality is, if Christmas doesn't make you uncomfortable, it's not Christmas. You know, we all think we're supposed to just watch other people play the role. Oh, and I'm going to speak to, if we could just get some younger people to do all the work. That's not how it works. Everybody's called to play a role in the Christmas story. And you think, everybody, I'm talking to everybody above the age of 75 right now, you think that your childbearing years are done. It's not true. Because right down the hallway are a bunch of kids that now belong to you. And you're called to raise them and to bring up a generation of young people who will return people to the Lord. Oh, you see, that's the thing about God. God is going to disturb you and mess you up. If the Christmas story doesn't move you to some new place, doesn't call you to play a new role, it's just a sentimental waste of money and time. God didn't speak for 400 years and chose an old man and an old woman and put a fresh vision and dream in their heart. May God do the same with us, because the greatest story ever told is still being told.